I'm going to show you how to throw a cylinder. So I have 4 ounces of clay, a sponge, and a trimming tool. That's about all we need outside of this bucket of water, which is essential for throwing. First thing we have to do is stick the clay to the center of the wheel, as close to the center as we can get it. You can throw it down, give a little push, and this doesn't seem like a lot of clay. We're just using a little bit, but that's because we will waste very little and your movements will be much more intentional. So I'm making sure my pedal is in the right position, and I'm going to get some water on my hands and on the clay because we definitely need everything to be slippery. And I'm going to use pressure from my palm, just going in a straight line through the clay, coming out my forearm, and just push and give some resistance. And the clay started to slide there a little bit, wasn't quite stuck. So I gave it a little push again, go back to my same movement, and it did not stick. And this is a very common mistake and little situation you got to deal with. So I cleaned up the wheel with my sponge, clean off some of the wet, slippery part on the clay, and just kind of reformed it back into a ball so that it's a little bit easier to stick back to the wheel. Threw it down a little bit harder this time and picked up my sponge that I dropped, and here we are again. And this time I'm going to put a little pressure straight down as I push into the clay, and I'm kind of making this little hockey puck, but I definitely need to push through my forearm, out my palm, and give that clay some resistance so that it can be more centered and less wobbly. And you can see it's still a little wobbly, you see my hand moving, but I'm not pressing from the side. I'm pressing straight through my forearm in a straight line. This is much, much more stable than if you try to go from your elbow side to side. And if the clay starts to stick to my skin, when I keep pushing on it, I'll add a little more water. And you can see how the clay starts to move up a little bit. I'm not shoving it off the wheel, but I am just redistributing the clay. I'm going back to that double movement of pressure down and pressure into the clay. And I want to make sure that I keep this pressure all consistent. I'm going to lose a little bit of clay. That's just sort of what happens in the process. And I'm making this weird little hockey puck that got a little twisty down there, which is a little not good, but it won't be the end of the world right now. So first step was to get it kind of centered where it's not so wobbly. So now I'm going to do something called coning. I'm going to put pressure on the wheel and then put into the clay with upward motion into my left hand and bring it up into a cone. So I start at the bottom, press in and upwards, make that clay into a cone. So my left hand is sort of catching the clay. And you can see where I lost a little bit of clay there. It was starting to stick, so I need to make sure it's slippery, and I added more water. So I press upwards, make that cone. So I coned up, and now I need to cone down to get it back into a hockey puck. So I'm going to put the tip of the clay in that little pocket right there I make with my hand and press it down to get it into a little dome. And then we usually do this 2 or 3 times. We want to make sure everything's slippery. If the clay sticks to your skin, that's a problem. So I'm making my little hockey puck, and I'm going to go back and do this again, starting at the bottom, press inwards and upwards, push that clay up into a cone, and then bring it back down again. This time I'm trying a little different, do my little chopping motion, and now I have my hockey puck again. So the next step, step 2 technically, is to sink the well. So I'm going to use my finger at an angle and press down into the clay, just sort of behind the center. And just press down a little bit, carefully going down. I don't want to hit the wheel. That would be real bad because then I'd have a donut. I wouldn't have a cylinder. I can kind of see it, feel that I'm not too thin. Step 3 is to open and compress the floor. So I make a little hook with my index finger and I just pull back towards my body and I open that cylinder up a little bit. The clay spreads out. And now I'm going to gently add some pressure to the floor to compress that clay, because if I don't, the clay particles might not be pressed together and I could end up with a crack in the bottom. So I just gently center to the outside, move my finger sort of like the arm of a record player. Now, step 4 is going to be compressing the walls. So I'm just going to pinch with my index fingers there, one on the wheel, one on the bottom of the pot, and just pinch together a little bit. You can see how the clay kind of moves up. I do this 3 times. That was 2. I can feel it's getting a little sticky, so I'll add a little more water. I can also use my thumb as sort of like a trail for the water to fall down. So now it's slippery again. And I'll do my 3rd compression. Something this size pretty much need 3 compressions. And I'm just gently compressing that clay and it moves up and gets a little more even. Step 5, I need to compress the rim. And so I like to make my fingers in a little cross there and just kind of press in with one finger and down with the other, and that compresses the rim. You work this clay over a lot, and so if you don't compress the rim, that's another way to get cracks. Next step is going to be to pull the walls up. So I'm going to again start at the bottom, and I'm going to offset my fingers. They are not they're not together, they are offset, and that helps distribute the clay up. And so with consistent pressure, you just slowly move your fingers up. And the wheel should be moving a little bit slower here. I get kind of caught up in the process, and so that first pull was actually a little too fast. The wheel was too fast, so I slowed it down this time. There's a lot of physics happening here. We need to make sure that we're not fighting the physics. So I'm doing a second pull. And usually we do about 3 pulls. So always starting at the bottom to redistribute the clay. I have a little too much water there, so I use my sponge to get it out at the bottom. You don't want to have it full of water. And you can see how my shape is a little bit like a volcano, and I want it to be a cylinder, a straight-walled cylinder. So I'm going to use a little extra pressure down here on the bottom, on the outside, to push that clay in and then pull it straight up. So I add a little bit more water in there to make sure everything's slippery. And you can see the clay kind of distribute up a little bit more. Do a little quick compression on the rim. And there's still quite a bit of clay there. You can kind of see how it's splayed out. So I just got the clay a little wet and just pressed in with my finger a little just to kind of get that back into the pot and not let it be wasted. And I can kind of just sort of feel a little bit, see where things are even. You can see this piece is a little wonky. I'm going to compress the rim again, sort of smooth it out. We can see a little bit of a spiral there. That's from an uneven pool. This is not really a high quality piece at the moment. So one thing we have to do is, usually at the bottom there's a little bit of clay sticking out a little bit. It's not quite a cylinder yet, so I use my trimming tool. We call this trimming the skirt. That clay sort of flows out like a spinning skirt. And so you use the edge of the trimming tool to clean that off. And then there's always a little bit of clay left on the wheel. So I just very slowly turn the wheel on and use the edge of the trimming tool to just kind of scrape that off. And because it's a little messy, I'll just use the edge and press into the walls there and just kind of smooth all that stuff out. It makes it look a lot neater. And then last bit is to do your final touch-ups. I can use the sponge to smooth out any edges, get rid of any lines from all the work we've been doing. And then again, make sure there's no puddles of water down on the bottom. And finally, I need to remove this piece, so I'm going to use the point of my trimming tool here, and I'm just going to carve away a tiny bit and leave that little undercut right there, because in order to remove the pot from the wheel, I need to use this wire tool here. Okay, and so you wrap it around your fingers. You only want as much wire as absolutely needed to pass under the pot between your thumbs, and I put some water there to sort of give it some surface tension. And with purpose, I'm just going to slide that towards my body. If you go hesitant and you stop halfway and have to keep moving, you end up with a weird sort of ridge underneath. So I throw a little more water on there so that I have something to slide my pot on. Open my splash pan, just sort of gently press towards the base and slide it off into my other hand. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to go set it aside. And I thought I'd do this one more time with another portion of clay, just a little bit faster through all the motions. Now, I don't always do this, but I'm going to just use the trim tool to just sort of clean up the clay stuck to the wheel, wipe it down, and then get my fresh clay and stick it to the wheel. Throw it down, press it, and then start in. This is my compression and centering with pressure, and then I'm going right into coning, going up. See how that looks a little bit like a unicorn horn? That means I was going a little bit fast. A little less spirally. Cone up, cone down. Add a little water. You always want it to be slippery. You don't want to feel anything sticking. So I'm going to sink the well. And then open it up and then compress the floor. That's almost one movement. Here I am thinning the walls. 1, 2, 3. Compress the rim. And go to my first pull. Got to slow it down. Almost forgot. And there we go. First pull. Not too bad. Add a little bit of water to make sure things are slippery. And good press in at the base. Got quite a bit of height on that second pull, which is always nice to see. Still have my skirt down there. I got plenty of clay at the bottom that I can redistribute into the piece. So another bit of good compression. Press in at the base. Fingers offset as you pull the clay up. And there we go. And I need to compress the rim. And that's all I really need for this much clay in this size piece. So I'm going to trim the skirt. Get rid of that little bit of an excess because I really want this to be a cylinder. Clean up that little bit of mess of the trimmings. And I'm just going to use the edge to smooth things out. This is something I'm pretty meticulous about. I like smooth-walled cylinders, smooth-walled vessels. And so I'll use the edge, and I'm going to do it one more time here with the other side, and just kind of almost like I'm doing a pull, but I'm not really adding any height. I'm just sort of adding a little pressure to push the clay against the wood, and then it smooths out the whole thing. So now I'm going to go ahead and make that little undercut again at the very base, just about the little bigger than the width of the wire that I'm going to use to cut it off. Get that water down there to pull underneath the pot with the wire. That gives it some surface tension to sort of easily slide off the wheel. Open up my splash pan, press at the base to slide that onto my hand. And there's my second cylinder, and when I picked that up, I realized that bottom is really thin, may not actually survive. And I'm bringing it over to the first one, and I kind of realized something kind of funny, a good comparison here. When I bring it back, you'll see these are two different size pots, but they are the exact same size portion of clay. So that just sort of goes to show you what you can do.